Welcome to the Helsinki Book Fair, even if it's virtually, Charlotte McConaghyn.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I assume you're in Australia at the moment. Is it the evening or morning or where in time are we?
Yeah, I'm in Sydney, so it's 5 p.m. in the evening.
Okay, and we're saying good morning at 9 a.m. from Helsinki. Hey, we would love to talk to you, of course, about migrations. Uh, let's start from the fact that it's been a huge, great success. What do you think, although I know it's hard to sort of compliment yourself, but why do you think the book has been such a huge success?
Oh, good question. I think it's maybe it's because it's very timely. I think it's about the loss of our beautiful animals. And I think that's something that we're all starting to really become aware of and worry about. But it's also a very human story. It's romantic and tragic, and I think if you can kind of get people to cry, then it's a book that will stay in their memory.
Yeah, I think the book really has it all, like you said. Let's go back to the very beginning. Can you remember the exact moment even, or sort of trace it back to the initial idea, or how did it come about?
It, there wasn't a single moment. It was a slow kind of building for this book. It took me a long time and a lot of pieces to kind of for it to culminate in my mind. But I remember that I was traveling at the time, traveling up and down the coast of Ireland. And just really noticing all the beautiful migratory birds, and kind of on a bit of a roaming exploration for my roots and my heritage and my history. So I think those things started to kind of come together, to create this character of Franny, who is someone who's a bit kind of lost herself and kind of seeks out family and people and a place to belong, but is also very kind of in love with birds and wildlife and very bird-like herself in a way, because she's migratory just like them. Um, yeah, I think that's kind of where it all started.
Or tell us something more about Franny, of course, without any spoilers in case there's someone who still hasn't read the novel, but still, what sort of central character did you want to create, and what did you consciously want to avoid, sort of? What didn't you want?
Okay, well, she was an interesting journey for me because she sort of it in a way it felt like she built herself or created herself. She was one of those characters that really kind of arrived before me fully formed and sort of guided me through the book. So a lot of it was instinctive rather than conscious. But I knew that I wanted her, as I said, to reflect the kind of wildlife that she loves. And so she's wild. She's wilder than most people, or more able to kind of tap into the wildness within her. And she doesn't subscribe to a lot of the normal kind of, I guess, societal values that most of us follow, like wealth, ambition, career. She's sort of, I think she's much more transitory than that, and I think in a way she's creaturely. I love the idea that some people are kind of more guided through life, by instinct than by anything else. So I knew that I wanted her to be sort of fearless in that way, which is a part of me kind of wanting to be as fearless as she is, or as brave as she is, as connected to the natural world as she is. I didn't want her to be, I guess, I didn't want her to feel small or quiet. I wanted her to feel bold and big and courageous. She's also very damaged, of course, so she's a lot of the things that I'm glad that I'm not. um, and she's, she has a lot of demons and a lot of kind of wounds that she's running from. So she's not perfect by all means. She's very flawed, but she does have that courageous spirit that I really love.
She does, and she's really inspiring. You mentioned instinctiveness when you were writing or creating the character. What sort of role does instinct play in your writing versus like very rational, conscious planning? And what's the ratio of instinct and?
Well, I mean, I've always been a very instinctive writer, and I've been writing since I was very young. So, you know, growing up, just loving stories and kind of not necessarily learning about them in any way other than just reading and kind of inhaling them and letting them seep through my pores. So in that way, I guess a lot of my writing is instinctive. I like my characters to feel instinctive, to guide me through stories. I like to write with a lot of deep emotion. But on the other side of that, it's also, I think, important to use craft to kind of create the most emotional responses from readers. So I do like to kind of step out of that instinctive emotional side and do things like plan out my kind of key story beats and structure my story so that I know that it'll have the best impact. And I guess look at my character arcs to know that, you know, they're starting from somewhere and winding up somewhere quite different. So, gosh, if I had to divide it up, maybe 60% instinct and 40% sort of planning, craft, rules, structure.
Well, it certainly works, so that must be like the perfect ratio. I was going to ask about sort of your writing process. Do you, how much do you plan out and do like timelines and make notes? And do you like have this planning room with flapboards and post-its, or what is it like to you?
Well, to begin with, I tend to start with research. So for this book, Migrations, it obviously needed a lot of research. So that was a big early part of my process. And it, you know, it does tend to get a little bit overwhelming, I think, when you start to realize how much you don't know in this kind of world of fishermen and, you know, sailing across the world. So I had to at one point stop researching and go, okay, now you really need to actually start writing and step into this and just, you know, because I'm a fiction writer, I'm not writing nonfiction. And then from that point, I think I like to just write and see where it takes me, having a bit of a broad sense of where I want to end up. And then when I start to get stuck, I'll step back out and I'll start planning my plot points. And that's when I do get my little cards up on the wall. And especially with this book, because it has multiple timelines, I needed to sort of have a sense of where they were both going. But I didn't want to plan that too much. I wanted to kind of move between them where it felt right to move. So yeah, I mean, I guess it's mostly just writing ahead, and then when I get stuck, I step out and plan.
What do you do when you get stuck, or when there's a day when the writing doesn't like flow at all? Do you throw the computer at the wall, or do you go for a walk, or what do you do?
Yeah, it's definitely lots of walking. Music for me is really important. It kind of helps me to get into the right mood. It's all about mood for me. So I have to be able to kind of sink into a slightly melancholy state in order to do my best work. Otherwise, I do find myself sitting and kind of staring at a blank wall and just everything that comes out just feels terrible. And I tend to find that that's the best place for me to step away, to do something else, to read a book, watch a movie, go for a walk, listen to music, something that will trigger that emotional state and inspire me to kind of sink back into the right place, mood-wise. I don't force it every day though. If it's not working, I will, I'm not gonna. If I force it, I find that it just bad stuff comes out.
Yeah, that's true. I read somewhere, I think, that you're not really, well, didn't say you're not a morning person, but you don't like to write in the morning as much as you like it in the evening or night, or was it true?
Yeah, it used to be. I used to be a real night owl, and I would write really late into the night. With the world being dark and quiet around me, I sort of loved that feeling of being alone, really alone. I don't have that anymore. I've kind of got I would say that I'm kind of trying to shift into a more productive state, because that's, it's not easy to have a relationship or a family when you just write all night. So I'm trying to kind of shift more into being a morning writer, which is new for me.
I take it you've already or also written professionally for screen, sort of. Is there something you take away from that and that you can bring into like your methods of writing a novel, or is it just like completely different?
No, it's very helpful actually. So I did my 2 degrees in screenwriting, and they were hugely helpful for my prose writing. When I mentioned before that I like to use structure and sort of character transformations, that's all craft that I learned in my screenwriting. So I think you approach the actual writing very differently. It's got a different feel and a different tone, and you have a different relationship to it. But when you step away and you kind of need to do that bigger work, that's all craft work that can be translated to both. It's also something that makes my writing a lot more visual when I'm thinking about what are we seeing, how are the characters kind of interacting with this space. That's something that I found that made my prose writing a lot more tactile, I guess. And I hope brings the reader into that kind of space and allows them to really see it and feel it in a way that you do in a film.
Yeah, I was going to ask because I thought that it might be, or actually when you're reading the novel, it's such a, well, of course, every time you're reading something, your mind produces the images, but this is like particularly strong visually somehow. And I thought that maybe you are like a really visual writer with the screenwriting background. Did you already sort of, while writing this book, sort of secretly dream that it will be made into a film, maybe, as it is, I think?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's always a fantasy, isn't it? It's kind of what you hope for that, without daring to ever assume. But I think if you can make something visual, it's got more of a chance, definitely. And I was very lucky that it had some interest from producers, and we kind of signed with this really fabulous team that I'm really hoping will be able to make it into the film. It would be an epic movie.
I'm sure it will, and we're looking forward to it. Since migrations is also sort of, well, not political, but in its sort of environmental aspect makes it political, sort of, in this current world we're living in, unfortunately. How do you sort of incorporate this sort of, where it wasn't properly like a political agenda or anything, because when you force something like that into a like emotional fictional book, it might go horribly wrong? Or how did you sort of think about this aspect when you want to say something about actual world situation, but then don't want to
Yeah.
ruin like.
You don't want to lecture people. That's the first kind of thing. You don't want to be preachy, because nobody wants that. It doesn't land well. Yeah, it's a tricky one. It is. I know I keep saying it, but it is a little bit about instinct. You know, I had to sort of feel how much of it felt right for me. I didn't want it to be too heavy-handed. Also, I think what really helped in that respect, because the book is set, for anyone who doesn't know, in the very near future, during the peak of the extinction crisis. So it's a little bit further along than we are now. Not a lot. I think that future is unfortunately quite close. But one of the things that kind of worked, I think, for this novel was not pushing too heavily on the world building. So not creating a world that felt too futuristic or too unrecognizable. I wanted it to be familiar. And so in that sense, I kind of left most things as they are today. So it's very recognizable. It feels like today's world, with a few kind of major changes, of course, which is that all the animals are extinct. And I think in that way, it didn't become too heavy-handed. It held off a little bit on that side, on the dystopian side of things. I think, you know, it's not as dystopian as it could have been had I kind of pushed it more into that science fiction space. And I think in that, if I had done that, it would have felt possibly more preachy and possibly more political.
It's true, and I think you did a fantastic job with just that, because there's always the sort of danger of being like very righteous or sort of pushing the reader away with the, and also if it's too like dystopian, it's not so relatable. But you certainly sort of sidestepped that. How did the pandemic affect your creativity? Because I've talked to writers who say it's like the best time ever, and well, not the pandemic in itself, but sort of getting to just crawl into your cave and not come out. And some people have told me that it totally blocked everything and was a horrible experience. How was it for you, or how has it been?
Yeah, how is it? Well, it landed at a really funny time for me, because I had just finished writing my next novel, which is called Once There Were Wolves. And so I was I get exhausted after I've finished a book. And so I went into this real kind of slump afterwards. And then suddenly there was this pandemic. And so it was this really strange space for me of feeling not creative at all, just feeling brain dead and exhausted. And then that kind of started to stretch out, and I found it quite difficult to get back into the creative space. I think because when you're sort of so focused on the world around you, it's very difficult to find the focus that you need in order to sink down into writing a novel. I know that was how it was for me. I need a real sense of disconnect from, I guess, from what's happening in the real world. For me, it's total escapism, and it's hard. I wanted to do that, don't get me wrong. I'd love to escape all of this madness, but I think it did feel harder at that time. I feel more ready now to kind of move back into a creative space, and I think maybe I'll be more on the side of feeling happy to just, vanish into it.
My last question is about the theme of the Helsinki Book Fair this year, which is dialogue. What do you most enjoy about the dialogue between you and your readers? You must get a lot of feedback, and usually it's probably just like, I love this book, it's great, but which must feel wonderful. But what are like the most insightful or inspiring, well, not letters, but emails or messages that you get from readers, or when you're meeting them in person somewhere?
Yeah, well, it's it's mostly been emails. Yeah, that's a really beautiful question. I think it does kind of feel really nourishing when you do have that dialogue with readers. I think we can forget how important it is. Writers, I think, are very insular, solitary people by nature. Um, and so there's something really quite profound about connecting with a reader, and I guess becoming aware that this thing that you've kind of created in your mind in such a lonely space has now left you and become something that belongs to other people. There's something really quite beautiful about that, and necessary about it. I love hearing from people who say that, you know, the book has kind of opened them up to thinking differently about the world, or noticing the birds more, or, you know, thinking about how they might have a more positive impact on the world instead of such a negative impact. I love hearing from people who just felt moved by the story and by the character, because I think that's sort of why we write, in a way, is to connect with people. And yeah, that's really kind of how we get that nourishment.
We hope that we will provide you with that nourishment so that the pandemic will end and we will get to meet you maybe one day in Finland too, at the book fair or anywhere else.
I love that.
We're looking forward to that. We thank you for taking the time to talk to us all across the world, and we wish you a great fall and winter and the rest of the year. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely to chat.